When Robert James Wilson in Marlin Falls attempted to humiliate Pam Bondi before a courtroom full of spectators, he believed it was a calculated display of authority, until Bondi unveiled a revelation so damning it led to his immediate detention in full public view. The mahogany double doors of Courtroom 7A flew open as Robert James H. Stone entered with commanding presence, his black judicial robes flowing like a storm cloud behind him. Instantly, a hush swept over the gallery, the weight of his reputation silencing every whispered exchange. At 62, Stone moved with the assurance of a man who had wielded his gavel for 23 years, collecting influence and adversaries with equal measure. "All rise," the bailiff intoned, his voice reverberating beneath the vaulted ceiling. The trial, the United States versus Kessler Global, had dominated national discourse for weeks. Allegations of large-scale financial fraud, environmental violations, and illicit political dealings had gripped the country. Stone had taken the bench after two prior Roberts recused themselves, both citing ethical conflicts. At the prosecution's desk, State Attorney General Pam Bondi methodically sorted her files. At 56, she had cultivated a formidable reputation, unflinching in the face of corporate wrongdoing, known for her incisive logic and tenacity in the courtroom. Her blonde hair was styled into a sleek, professional bun, and her deep navy suit was impeccably pressed. "The court will now hear from the prosecution," Robert Stone said, lowering his glasses with a pointed look. His tone betrayed a sharp impatience, familiar to anyone who had witnessed his court in session. Bondi rose smoothly, her posture composed. "Your Honor, the prosecution seeks to present newly acquired financial documents pertaining to offshore accounts maintained by senior leadership at Kessler Global. These materials establish a consistent pattern of—" "Ms. Bondi," Stone interjected, his voice steeped in derision, "are you insinuating that your office just now stumbled upon pivotal evidence? This isn't an episode of primetime fiction where new clues magically surface between advertisements." A murmur of unease flickered among the attorneys present. While Stone's disdain for Bondi had long circulated in professional circles, this open ridicule stunned even seasoned legal observers. "Your Honor," Bondi replied in an even tone, "these records were obtained through lawful procedures pursuant to warrants sanctioned by Michael Moore only last week." "How very convenient," Stone interrupted again, removing his glasses with exaggerated flair. "Perhaps by next Tuesday you'll discover the remains of Senator John in the defendant's wine cellar." Uneasy chuckles rose from the defense bench. Bondi's associate beside her stiffened, but she held her ground, unshaken. "With the court's indulgence, the prosecution's motion is both procedurally appropriate and materially significant. The ruling in Norwood versus Dakota clearly supports." "Spare me the remedial lecture on Supreme Court rulings, Ms. Bondi," Stone snapped. "I was citing Norwood while you were still learning the rules of civil procedure." A ripple of discomfort moved through the gallery. Stone's courtroom sternness was no secret, but today his words teetered into personal hostility. Across the aisle, defense counsel reclined, visibly satisfied with the Roberts tone. "Motion denied," Stone declared, slamming his gavel with conspicuous force. "This court will not indulge last-minute treasure hunts meant to prop up a faltering case." Bondi remained upright. "Your Honor, I respectfully request the grounds for the denial be formally recorded." Stone's jaw clenched, a tic forming along his cheek. "The grounds, Counselor, are judicial discretion, a concept you may wish to study before returning to this bench." Bondi sat, exchanging a quiet yet resolute glance with her chief deputy. The Robert may have claimed the first point, but her composure suggested the match was far from concluded. As the morning progressed, the air thickened with tension. Robert Stone persistently obstructed the prosecution's efforts, interrupting Bondi's arguments with increasing sharpness, his remarks tinged with something that resembled contempt. It was clear to all present, the Robert was not merely questioning legal merit, he was actively trying to diminish her. Midway through the session, after sustaining the defense's third objection in quick succession, Stone leaned back in his chair and drawled, "Perhaps you could enlighten the court, Ms. Bondi. Did you personally oversee today's hearing preparations, or did you delegate the task to the same team that mishandled the Penrose case last March?" A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. The Penrose trial, an ambitious corruption suit that had collapsed, was managed by an entirely separate unit within the Attorney General's office. Bondi had no connection to it. Still, the Roberts barb was clearly calculated to cast doubt on her competence. "Your Honor," Bondi responded, her voice a model of control, "this legal team has prepared thoroughly, relying on substantial documentation of misconduct. The Penrose case was managed by a different group under separate circumstances." Stone leaned forward, fingers steepled under his chin like a man making a point he had long waited to deliver. I see. Because from my vantage, the pattern appears identical, ambitious claims built on shaky ground. He gestured toward the defense table. Counsel for Kessler Global should not be expected to defend against accusations that shift with every filing. At that moment, Martin Reeves, Bondi's co-counsel, slid a discreet note in her direction. She glanced down briefly, expression unchanged, then calmly returned her eyes to the bench. For the record, Bondi said with unmistakable clarity, the prosecution objects to any characterization suggesting our case is inconsistent or underprepared. Every motion has been filed in accordance with federal statute and all discovery obligations have been scrupulously met. Robert Stone let out a laugh, dry and hollow, entirely devoid of mirth. Duly noted, counselor. I'm sure the appellate court will find your protest compelling reading when, inevitably, your office's pattern of overcharging leads to a reversible error. Uneasy glances were exchanged across the room. Even the court reporter hesitated, her fingers frozen above the keys of her stenograph machine. Your Honor, Bondi continued, her tone composed, may I request a short sidebar? Request denied, Stone shot back without pause. There's nothing you have to say that can't be shared with all present. He gestured to the packed gallery. Transparency is the bedrock of justice, wouldn't you agree, Ms. Bondi? A flicker of resolve crossed Bondi's features. Beneath her polished demeanor, a calculation took shape. She gave her team a brief nod before answering. Absolutely, Your Honor. In fact, transparency is precisely the issue at the heart of this trial. Robert Stone squinted slightly, registering the shift in her tone. He glanced at his watch with theatrical indifference. Well then, since we seem to be going in circles with the prosecution's underwhelming motions, we'll recess for lunch. Court will resume at 1:30. His gavel came down in a loud thud as he rose and swept out of the chamber. As the gallery emptied, Bondi's team huddled together in urgent murmurs. Across the aisle, journalists scribbled with feverish intensity, aware that they were witnessing something unprecedented. The defense attorneys who had moments earlier reveled in the Roberts antagonism now exchanged wary looks. Something in Bondi's calm defiance hinted at deeper currents beneath the surface. When court reconvened after the lunch recess, the energy in the room had palpably shifted. The gallery was now beyond capacity, with additional reporters crammed into the aisles. Bondi returned flanked by two unfamiliar attorneys and a stack of indigo folders absent that morning. Robert Stone re-entered with the same self-important stride, seemingly oblivious to the new tension coiling through the courtroom. Ms. Bondi, he sneered, are you prepared to proceed without wasting more of the court's time? Yes, Your Honor, Bondi responded, standing slowly. The prosecution requests leave to address a matter of immediate and pressing concern related to these proceedings. Stone waved her off dismissively. Be brief, counselor. The defense has actual motions that merit our attention. Bondi nodded once toward her aide, who stepped forward with a bound dossier and placed it on the bench. Your Honor, I am formally submitting a motion for your immediate recusal from this case. A sharp collective inhale echoed throughout the chamber. Robert Stone's face turned an ominous shade of crimson. On what conceivable grounds, he barked, his voice rising. On the basis of demonstrated bias, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and a probable financial interest in the trial's outcome, Bondi replied evenly. Her voice carried through the hushed courtroom with unwavering clarity. This is outrageous. Stone roared, pounding his gavel. A baseless, desperate stunt. Before you continue, Your Honor, Bondi pressed on, undeterred, I direct your attention to Exhibit A within the binder now before you. It details 17 transactions between Meridian Capital Partners, a shell entity registered under your brother-in-law's name, and a controlled affiliate of Kessler Global. Stone froze, gavel suspended in midair. Furthermore, Bondi continued, Exhibits B through F contain notarized affidavits from 3 of your former clerks. Each affidavit attests to statements made by you expressing personal hostility toward me dating back to the 2019 Seacoast petrochemical investigation and inquiry which implicated several of your former law partners. A thick silence settled over the room. Even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed intrusive in its audibility. Defense attorneys remained rooted in their seats, stunned into silence. All of these documents, Bondi added, her tone still composed but forceful, have already been filed with the Judicial Oversight Committee as of 45 minutes ago. Identical copies were delivered to the Chief Robert of this district and to the Department of Justice's Office of Public Integrity. For the first time since the day's proceedings began, Robert Stone looked truly shaken. The bravado drained from his face as he rifled through the pages before him. This is a blatant attempt to handpick your Robert, he said at last, though his voice lacked its former vigor. Bondi remained where she stood. The prosecution seeks no such advantage, Your Honor. We ask only for what the Constitution promises, a neutral and impartial tribunal, free from personal entanglements or prejudice. She turned slightly, now addressing the courtroom itself. What we present is evidence of a corporation that inflicted financial harm and environmental damage on communities across this country. That evidence deserves an unbiased hearing. Nothing more. Nothing less. The defense sprang up in unison, lodging objections that fell flat against the thunderous silence that had taken hold. Their protests sounded hollow in the face of Bondi's methodical delivery and the quiet gravity that had descended. In the shadowed rear of the courtroom, a man in a charcoal suit, quiet until now, stepped aside to make a discreet phone call. Within moments, he returned his focus to the escalating confrontation at the bench. Robert Stone, visibly struggling to recover his composure, tugged at the edges of his robe and cleared his throat. These claims are entirely baseless, he declared, though the tremor in his voice betrayed a loss of confidence. The motion for recusal is denied. Bondi did not return to her seat. Then I must inform the court, she said evenly, that we've filed an emergency petition with the circuit court. I believe they're reviewing it as we speak. Almost theatrically, the courtroom doors creaked open. A court clerk entered briskly, a sealed envelope in hand, which he delivered directly to the bench. Stone broke the seal with shaking fingers. As his eyes moved over the contents, the blood drained from his face. The appellate court had not only accepted the emergency appeal, it had imposed an immediate stay on all proceedings until the recusal issue was resolved. This court will recess for 15 minutes, he announced, voice tight. Without further elaboration, he turned and vanished into his chambers. The instant the door closed, the room erupted into low, urgent murmurs. Defense counsel clustered nervously with their clients. Journalists darted from the gallery, phones and recorders already capturing updates for the world beyond. In the midst of the chaos, Bondi remained composed, calmly conferring with her team. When Stone returned, his earlier swagger had calcified into brittle defiance. Court is back in session, he snapped, hammering the gavel with theatrical force. The circuit's stay doesn't preclude us from resolving pending motions. Bondi stood without hesitation. With respect, Your Honor, the stay explicitly halts further proceedings until the recusal motion is adjudicated. I decide what happens in this courtroom, Ms. Bondi, Stone barked. And I'm not finished responding to your wild accusations. Bondi gave a slight nod to her deputy, who handed her another indigo-colored folder. Then perhaps, she said softly, we should move on to Exhibit G, though I had hoped it wouldn't be necessary to present it publicly. Stone stiffened. What exactly are you insinuating now? Nothing beyond what the evidence shows, Your Honor. Bondi walked deliberately to the bench and set the folder before him. Contained here are 5 wire transfers made by Kessler Global to Caribbean Holdings, which is ultimately controlled by Meridian Partners, the same financial conduit referenced earlier. The defense rose in a chorus of objections, but Bondi pressed on. The timing of each transfer coincides precisely with 5 rulings you handed down in favor of Kessler subsidiaries. Each decision deviated sharply from established precedent, and each resulted in substantial benefit to the corporation. From the gallery, a man stood and calmly revealed a federal badge to the bailiff. He stepped toward the aisle but lingered near the back, eyes trained on the bench. These are grotesque fabrications. Stone thundered, but the conviction had bled from his voice. The banking records speak for themselves, Your Honor, Bondi responded with steady composure. As do the sworn declarations of Robert Taylor and Robert Anderson, who recall explicit conversations where you sought to redirect Kessler-related matters to your docket. A profound silence engulfed the room. Even the defense appeared too stunned to interrupt. And perhaps most troubling, Bondi continued, is Exhibit H. An audio recording of your conversation with Charles Harrington at the Cypress Club just last month, where you assured him this case would never reach a jury. Stone recoiled, his expression stricken. That was a private conversation. Indeed it was, Bondi agreed, which makes your promise to sabotage a federal prosecution all the more alarming. At the back of the courtroom, the man with the badge was now flanked by 2 others, each wearing the insignia of the FBI's Public Corruption Division. They stood motionless, but the intent in their eyes was unmistakable. Stone clutched the edge of his bench, his knuckles blanching. This court is adjourned until further notice, he blurted, standing abruptly. Your Honor, Bondi called firmly. There remains one final issue that must be addressed immediately. But Stone didn't turn. He stormed toward his chambers, ignoring her voice and the stunned faces of the courtroom. The heavy door slammed behind him, the sound echoing like a verdict through the stillness. No one moved. The defense exchanged panicked whispers. Court personnel remained frozen at their posts. Even the court reporter, so typically unflappable, hovered with her fingers poised uncertainly above her machine. Bondi remained standing, tall, unshaken, inscrutable. At last, she turned to her team and gave a single quiet nod. A solemn-looking deputy with silver-rimmed glasses opened his briefcase and extracted a sealed envelope. Crossing to the clerk's desk, he handed it over with a soft word. The clerk opened it carefully, her eyes widening as she scanned its contents. "This is—" she began, then faltered, the implications rendering her momentarily speechless. "A federal warrant," Bondi finished for her, her voice calm and resolute. "Lawfully issued this morning by Robert Thomas of the Southern District." The three agents moved forward now, purposeful and composed. The lead agent exchanged a brief word with Bondi, then stepped to the clerk to examine the warrant. "Shall we notify Robert Stone?" the clerk asked, hesitating. The agent glanced toward the chambers and shook his head. "That won't be necessary," he said evenly. "We'll take it from here." The defense table burst into protest. Marcus Welford, lead counsel for Kessler Global, sprang to his feet. "This is absurd. Whatever vendetta the Attorney General is nursing." "This is no vendetta, Counselor," Bondi interjected calmly. "It is the conclusion of an 8-month inquiry conducted by the FBI in collaboration with the Justice Department's Public Integrity Division." The federal agents advanced toward the Roberts chambers. The courtroom deputy, uncertain of the proper protocol, hesitated before stepping aside. The lead agent rapped firmly on the heavy door. No answer. He knocked again, this time with greater urgency. "Robert Stone, this is federal law enforcement. We ask that you open the door immediately." The silence that followed was absolute. A chair creaked in the gallery and several spectators visibly flinched. Pens scratched furiously across notebooks as reporters chronicled every breathless second. The court sketch artist's hand moved at lightning speed. "Robert Stone," the agent repeated louder now. "We are in possession of a federal warrant. Please open this door." Still no response. The lead agent exchanged a silent nod with his colleagues. One produced a compact lockpick device. Within seconds, the door clicked open. The agents slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind them. Pam Bondi turned to the room, composed as ever. "Ladies and gentlemen," she addressed the gallery, "this court is now in recess. I ask that all parties remain seated until the federal officers complete their duties." The defense erupted again, voices rising in disbelief. Defendants at the table looked visibly shaken. Welford approached Bondi, his voice low but edged with fury. "You've choreographed this entire scene, haven't you?" he growled. "Regardless of what happens to Stone, our clients remain innocent until proven guilty." "I'm intimately familiar with the presumption of innocence, Counselor," Bondi replied evenly. "It extends to everyone, including federal Roberts. But it doesn't exempt anyone from lawful investigation when evidence demands it." A commotion near the chambers silenced the room. The door opened, and the federal agents reappeared, Robert James H. Stone between them. His face was pale, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. But it was the handcuffs, gleaming under the harsh courtroom lights, that stole the air from the room. "James H. Stone," the lead agent said clearly, "you are under arrest for violations of Title 18, U.S. Code Sections 201 and 2, related to judicial corruption, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." A wave of gasps swept across the courtroom. Jurors covered their mouths. The bailiff, a decades-long veteran of the courthouse, stood paralyzed as the Robert he had served was led away in irons. "This is a travesty," Stone shouted, his voice cracking. "I demand legal representation and a hearing before a neutral magistrate." "You'll receive both, Your Honor," the agent replied, his respectful use of the title laced with quiet irony. The warrant includes provisions for your immediate appearance before Robert David in the Eastern District. Bondi stood motionless as her long-standing adversary was brought past her. Stone paused, glaring at her. "You orchestrated this charade," he hissed under his breath. "You think this will stand?" "The evidence orchestrated it, Robert," Bondi replied in a quiet, unwavering tone. "The same evidence you chose to ignore in case after case." The agents continued their march toward the exit. Just as they reached the threshold, a court administrator burst into the room, visibly rattled. "Per the Chief Roberts' order," he announced, avoiding Stone's eyes, "all active dockets under Robert Stone are being reassigned effective immediately. Also, the sealed indictment has now been released to the public docket." The journalists exploded into motion, sprinting from the gallery to file the breaking story. At the defense table, Kessler's attorneys sat in stunned silence, whispering frantically to their clients. A junior prosecutor approached Bondi, holding a tablet. Its screen displayed a breaking headline: "Federal Robert arrested in corruption scandal. AG Bondi uncovers years-long bribery scheme." "Shall we issue a statement?" the young attorney asked quietly. Bondi shook her head. "The indictment speaks for itself. Our role is to present evidence in court, not litigate in the press." Though the room was slowly emptying, the atmosphere buzzed with unresolved energy. Courthouse staff clustered in corners, whispering and shaking their heads in disbelief. At the chamber entrance, 2 senior Roberts had arrived and were deep in conversation with the administrator, their expressions grave. One of Bondi's deputies approached with an update. "Robert Williams been assigned the Kessler case. She's requested a status hearing at 9 a.m. tomorrow." Bondi nodded, already reorganizing her files. "Make sure the complete evidence binders are prepared for her review tonight, and update the witness list to include the former clerks." As her team moved into action, Bondi paused, her gaze falling on the now abandoned bench. For a brief moment, her calm facade faltered, the enormity of the day settling on her like a shadow. "Justice doesn't belong to any one person," she murmured, almost as if speaking to the empty bench. "Not to Roberts, not to prosecutors. Not even to me." Her team waited silently as she gathered herself. Then, with a final breath, she squared her shoulders. "Let's go," she said, her voice once again crisp. "We have a case to prepare." By late afternoon, a brief video clip of Robert James H. Stone being led from the Marlin Falls Federal Courthouse had ignited the internet. Captured on a court reporter's smartphone, the 12-second recording showed the once formidable jurist, wrists bound in gleaming handcuffs, escorted into a waiting government vehicle beneath sterile fluorescent lights. His expression, caught between disbelief and seething indignation, would become the defining image on every major news outlet before sundown. Inside the courthouse, a different sort of paralysis took hold. Court staff moved sluggishly, as though stunned by the tectonic upheaval that had fractured the otherwise predictable rhythm of their professional world. Clerks who had served under Stone for years clustered in corners, their hushed conversations shadowed by furtive glances toward his now silent chambers. "In over 2 decades on duty," one seasoned bailiff whispered, "I've never seen anything even close to this." In a nearby conference room, the legal team representing Kessler Global had barricaded themselves behind closed doors. Their blurred silhouettes gestured animatedly through the frosted glass, surfacing only to make tense phone calls before vanishing again behind the soundproof pane. Elsewhere, Pam Bondi had converted a side room into a makeshift command center. Her team worked with quiet intensity, sorting files and reviewing evidentiary materials in preparation for the case's transition to Robert William. Though the fall of Stone was undeniably historic, their focus remained unwavering: the prosecution of Kessler Global. "Ma'am," her chief of staff said, entering softly, "the Attorney General of the United States is on line 1. Bondi accepted the call in private. Her expression remained unreadable as she listened. When she returned minutes later, her staff paused mid-task, awaiting direction. "The Public Integrity Section will take over the Stone prosecution," she announced. "We remain committed to Kessler." Both cases will proceed, separately but in tandem. Outside, the courthouse had become a media spectacle. Satellite trucks crowded the street. Reporters delivered breathless dispatches beneath the monolithic structure's imposing facade. Legal analysts were already weighing in, many calling the event a seismic moment in modern jurisprudence. To witness the arrest of a sitting federal Robert inside his own courtroom, one pundit remarked gravely, "Isn't just extraordinary, it's virtually without precedent." As Bondi finally exited the courthouse, a wall of microphones and flashing bulbs awaited her. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the steps, lending a cinematic air to the scene. Attorney General Bondi, was the arrest premeditated? One journalist called out. Did you bait the Robert into misstepping for strategic gain? Another asked. Was this politically motivated? Bondi raised one hand, and the questions died instantly. She stood in silence for several long beats, calculating her response with the same deliberate care she brought to the courtroom. What occurred today is not a triumph, nor is it a tragedy, she said finally. It is the justice system doing what it is designed to do. No person, regardless of their title or tenure, is above the law. She declined to take further questions, promising a formal press conference the next morning. As she descended the courthouse steps, the cameras rolled on, capturing an indelible image. A poised, unflinching prosecutor walking into history, not with elation, but with solemn resolve. Behind her, the courthouse loomed as always, stoic and monumental. Yet something had changed within its marble walls. Throughout its corridors, courtrooms sat in uneasy quiet. Gavels rested, conversations slowed. A reckoning was unfolding, and every Robert in the district felt it echo. By the following dawn, Robert Stone's arrest had transcended breaking news. It had become a nationwide sensation. Morning programs led with the footage. Legal forums crashed from the surge of online traffic. Social media was ablaze with hashtags. Hashtag Bondi's bravery. Hashtag judicial fall. Hashtag Robert in cuffs. The Judicial Ethics Review Board issued a rare emergency statement. This represents a watershed moment for judicial transparency. It read, if substantiated, the charges against Robert Stone underscore the necessity for greater oversight and the ongoing reform of internal accountability mechanisms. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle offered cautious support for the investigation, reiterating the presumption of innocence. But behind closed doors, more pointed conversations emerged, with legislative aides and senior officials debating proposals to overhaul how the federal judiciary monitors itself. At precisely 9 a.m., Pam Bondi stood behind a podium in the Justice Department's main briefing room, flanked by agents from the FBI's Public Corruption Division and senior members of her prosecution team. Before a phalanx of cameras, she delivered a measured account of the investigation that had brought down a federal Robert. The evidence reveals a sustained pattern of judicial impropriety extending more than 5 years, she stated. This includes documented financial exchanges linked to favorable rulings, direct communication with defendants outside official channels, and deliberate efforts to interfere with prosecutions targeting specific entities. She paused, letting the gravity of the statement settle before continuing. Let it be clear, this case is not about one man. It is about protecting the integrity of the bench, the impartiality of justice, and the public's faith in the institutions we serve. She confirmed that the investigation had begun months earlier, quietly triggered by internal reports from former law clerks disturbed by Robert Stone's handling of cases involving specific corporate interests. Their whistleblower complaints had formed the bedrock of what would become a seismic legal reckoning. When asked why she had chosen to personally argue the Kessler Global case despite being aware of the ongoing investigation into the presiding Robert, Pam Bondi's reply was unflinching. Justice doesn't function when prosecutors abandon difficult courtrooms, she stated firmly. My responsibility was to present the government's case against Kessler with the same rigor and principle I bring to any prosecution, regardless of who sits on the bench. Across the city, in a stark federal courtroom devoid of prestige or ceremony, James H. Stone made his initial appearance before Magistrate Robert David. His black robes were gone, replaced by a subdued gray suit that hung from his frame like a memory. The once imposing Robert entered with hunched shoulders and a guarded expression as he quietly entered a plea of not guilty. The magistrate, unmoved by Stone's former stature, set bail at $5 million, drawing murmurs from the gallery. Stone was also ordered to surrender his passport. The man who had once wielded the bench with derision now sat silent as his defense counsel unsuccessfully argued for leniency. By mid-afternoon, the ripple effects began in earnest. 2 U.S. senators who had once proudly championed Stone's nomination issued statements announcing they would return campaign contributions tied to Kessler Global. Meanwhile, the Judicial Nomination Committee that had vetted him launched a full review of its vetting procedures. At the State Bar Association, an emergency ethics panel convened. "This will be taught in law schools for generations," one senior member remarked. "It's the definitive case study in why judicial temperament must be weighed as heavily as legal acumen." For Bondi, the deluge of attention came with both admiration and burden. While professional accolades arrived from colleagues and legal institutions, her security detail was quietly increased after multiple threatening messages reached her office. Still, for every threat, there were dozens of notes of gratitude, from attorneys once humiliated in Stone's courtroom, from students moved by her resolve, from citizens grateful to see that even those in high office could be held accountable. That evening, as the media frenzy began to shift its gaze to newer headlines, Bondi remained at her desk, alone, focused, and reviewing briefs related to the Kessler prosecution. A newspaper lay nearby, its headline half obscured beneath a legal pad. "The Robert who mocked," until the handcuffs clicked. She pushed it aside. The spectacle had passed, but the real work, the steady, methodical pursuit of corporate accountability, continued. It would never command the same headlines as a Robert in cuffs, but it was why she had entered the courtroom to begin with. Across courtrooms nationwide, Roberts took the bench the next morning with a new awareness of the watchful eyes upon them. Some welcomed the scrutiny as a necessary safeguard. Others chafed at the perceived mistrust. But none could deny that the climate had shifted. As for James H. Stone, his name had already been stripped from the door outside Courtroom 7A. In its place hung a simple printout, Courtroom 7A, a temporary sign, a subtle but potent symbol of how swiftly even the most immovable power can vanish once justice decides to knock.